It all comes down to one question. Can the Uncharted franchise survive without Nathan Drake? After a decade of adventures with one of the most iconic video game characters of all time, The Lost Legacy certainly was handed an ungrateful task. No one seriously questioned whether Naughty Dog could pull it off to satisfy our action-adventure needs by creating breathtaking vistas, action-packed set pieces, top-notch graphics, and adventure flair. We know they can, and they do it better than anyone else in the industry. We are talking about Naughty Dog after all. The only question we truly had to consider was whether Lost Legacy would touch us on an emotional level. Naughty Dog made unmistakably clear that Nathan Drake's story arc has come to a close. The entire game was true to the motto, one last time. What started as an intended Uncharted 4 DLC turned into a full-fledged standalone adventure. This is why I'm going to judge the game by the same standards as a mainline Uncharted game. This time around we follow Chloe Frazer, an already well-established and beloved character for many, and Uncharted 4 newcomer Nadine Ross. They form an uneasy alliance in order to find the legendary tusk of Ganesh. For that reason they embark on a journey through the gorgeous landscapes and mysterious mythology of India. In doing so they cross the path of an Indian warlord named Asaf, who is just as eager to obtain the precious artifact. As all the Uncharted games before, the success of The Lost Legacy hinges on organic, believable character dynamics. To be honest, I've never been so conflicted regarding an Uncharted game. The best way to describe The Lost Legacy is by saying it presses all the right buttons, except for one. Should the Uncharted franchise continue without Nathan Drake? The Lost Legacy hopes to answer this question. Let me start this review by getting the obvious out of the way. I don't know what magic wand Naughty Dog is using, but for over a decade now this studio has been on the forefront of generation-defining graphics. Every single time the girls and guys at Naughty Dog push the PlayStation hardware to its limits. Uncharted 4 as well as The Lost Legacy hands down belong to the most impressive technical showcases of the current console generation. No matter if we are talking about texture quality, physics, draw distance, vegetation, lighting, and above all else, the mind-blowing animation work, Naughty Dog raises the graphical bar again and again. Lost Legacy definitely isn't a huge jump from Uncharted 4, but the fact that it looks even a little bit better should tell you everything you need to know. I think it's fair to say that no one beats Naughty Dog anymore when it comes to convincing and detailed representations of human beings. The facial animations alone catch even the slightest emotional cues. I'm not a graphic whore, phenomenal graphics aren't a must-have for me, but by God, they certainly don't hurt either. The insane graphical fidelity mixed with Naughty Dog's colorful art design makes The Lost Legacy to a drop-dead gorgeous game. But I'm sure no one is particularly surprised about a fantastic looking Naughty Dog game. Still, they deserve the praise. Which leads us to Lost Legacy's environments. Like many Uncharted fans, I'm happy about the fact that The Lost Legacy returns to an Asian setting. Uncharted Among Thieves is widely regarded as the pinnacle of the entire series, not least because of its stunning Nepalese environments, ranging from giant cities, jungles and snowy mountains. The Lost Legacy doesn't offer the same variety since it revolves almost entirely around the dense Indian jungle. However, the beginning of the game reminds an awful lot of the urban war-torn city in Among Thieves, only that an Indian warlord is responsible for mayhem and destruction instead of a Russian one. In fact, The Lost Legacy can be regarded as a greatest hits compilation of Uncharted 2, as it shares not only similar environments but also riddle and set piece moments. Once we enter the spoiler part of this review, it will become unmistakably clear why The Lost Legacy is such a gratifying treat for Uncharted 2 adherents. The first half of the game moves at a very slow pace, which is highly unusual for the series. The slow pacing is mostly due to the largest open area ever to be featured in an Uncharted game, the Western Ghats. Uncharted 4 entered new territory for the series by introducing the player to enormous level structures and drivable vehicles. Even the combat arenas finally offered multiple traversable paths and allowed for a more nuanced playstyle. While combat encounters benefited a great deal from Uncharted 4's more open areas, the Madagascar chapter was met with mixed reception. On the one hand, the Jeep controls felt satisfying and driving through muddy, remote landscapes supported that pulp adventure atmosphere the series is known for. On the other hand, Uncharted is strongest during its linear, action-packed roller coaster rides. Sometimes the wide open areas in Uncharted 4 negatively affected the game's pacing, especially because they looked spectacular but didn't manage to reward exploration. They felt empty. The Lost Legacy's Western Ghats area inherits the same strengths and weaknesses. Granted, this time there's far more to be discovered, nothing of which is interesting enough to divert your attention from wanting to move the story along though. Just like the Madagascar chapter in Uncharted 4, the Western Ghats is where The Lost Legacy is at its weakest. Fortunately, the second half of the game picks up in speed and gets better and better the longer you go. The most riveting set piece and character moments all fall into the second half. As far as gameplay is concerned, Chloe controls like an exact copy of Nathan Drake. The mechanics during combat encounters and riddle sections are identical apart from a few minor tweaks like a newly added lockpicking mechanic Uncharted didn't really need if you ask me, and a broadened catalogue of weapons, most notably C4 and a silent pistol, which further enhances your stealth abilities. One of the most important additions Uncharted 4 brought to the series were vastly improved combat passages. Last generation Uncharted titles suffered from an overload of gunfights. The main problem of combat encounters in the Uncharted franchise, besides the fact that there always were too many, were the combat arenas in and of themselves and Nate's restricted movability. Uncharted is all about recreating the pulp adventure spirit, and for the most part it succeeded, except for combat sections. Since the heroes in pulp adventures often engage in fast-paced, energetic gunfights against groups of ruthless mercenaries, Uncharted's combat encounters should mediate the same feeling of empowerment and speed. Until Uncharted 4, however, the combat arenas didn't allow for constant movement and the realization of different strategic options. It always boiled down to the same static procedure. The game throws a ton of enemies at you, many of which prevent you from risking bold moves since their continuous rocket launcher and sniper fire are pinning you down. The safest way of surviving gunfights in previous installments was to take cover at a convenient location and shoot the hell out of any approaching enemy. You were barely forced to keep moving, and at times gunfights felt more like a chore instead of being a fun experience. The Lost Legacy profits from Uncharted 4's fantastic level design and rope swing mechanic. Gunplay in Uncharted still isn't a masterclass in game design, but since Uncharted 4 it finally feels fun and empowering. Naughty Dog decided to give players an incentive for bold attacks and constant movement within the level structure. Destructible environments, mudslides, and the grappling hook encourage to keep moving and bridge great distances. The surrounding vegetation and diving abilities provide stealth opportunities, allowing you to vanish and reorganize in the midst of battle. And at last, the combat arenas gained verticality. Uncharted's combat was in desperate need of these changes. Gunfights in Uncharted 4 and The Lost Legacy certainly aren't the poster child of third-person gunplay, but they are a huge leap from the last generation Uncharted titles. Lost Legacy's great emphasis on puzzles is where the game truly shines. Puzzles are abundantly present and belong to the best in the series. They are not only visually impressive, they also offer the right kind of challenge. Most riddles never felt too easy nor overly frustrating. Despite being identical to Uncharted 4, the platforming is way more compelling. In contrast to A Thief's End, The Lost Legacy included more platforming sections which make full use of Chloe's climbing gear. You have to combine grappling hook, piton, mudslice and carefully timed jumps in order to traverse the environment. Climbing in Uncharted usually has the problem that they are more of a graphics showcase than enjoyable gameplay activity. Climbing endless rock walls by hammering one button tends to overstate its welcome. Despite the piton and rope in Uncharted 4, it suffered from the same problem because the developers never combined the newly added tools in a fun and complex way, except for the very last chapter. Thankfully, The Lost Legacy doesn't make the same mistake for the most part.
Oh god, shit! Oh, is that trip really necessary?
Crates and leg up moments are kept to a minimum, and the more complex climbing sections from the end of Uncharted 4 occurs more often. Naughty Dog actually listened to its fans and said goodbye to repetitive crate pushing. There's a higher dose of self-referential jokes which leads to amusing scenes like this one.
Here we go. Oh! You trying to kill me? Sorry about that.
How about we avoid crates from now on?
Okay, good deal.
Now let's all hope The Last of Us Part 2 has similar plans for rolling dumpsters and wooden pallets. I swear to God, one more wooden pallet in The Last of Us 2 and I go to the first local supermarket around and wreck every single pallet I can get my hands on. Once people start wondering what the hell is wrong with me, all I'm going to say is, ask Neil Druckmann, until someone tackles me down and takes me into custody. A couple of months ago I uploaded a video titled "Will The Lost Legacy be better than Uncharted 4?" I guess this review is the perfect occasion to answer that question. As it turned out, all the hopes and concerns I raised in that video came true. The Lost Legacy actually is a giant Uncharted 2 nostalgia trip. The Lost Legacy has many of the best set pieces in the franchise, and so on and so forth. Gameplay-wise, it improves upon Uncharted 4. And yet, I have to answer this question with a clear no. As I said at the beginning of my review, The Lost Legacy pushes all the right buttons, except for one, which unfortunately is the most significant one: characters. Uncharted is all about character dynamics. Before you tear me apart, let me clarify a few things. I'm aware of the fact that it's more than a little bit unfair to compare the emotional impact of Uncharted 4 with The Lost Legacy. Uncharted 4 concluded the story arc of Nathan Drake, Elena Fisher and Victor Sullivan, the single most important characters of the series. It all started with this trio. It goes without question that Nadine and Chloe can't compete against the emotional weight of Nathan Drake's last adventure. Overall, The Lost Legacy is far more lighthearted, which is perfectly fine. It's a standalone adventure, mostly detached from the more serious tone of Uncharted 4. We also have to take into consideration that we haven't seen Chloe since Uncharted 3, and that Nadine was a secondary villain in Uncharted 4 and barely developed as a character. I take no issue whatsoever with the fact that the relationship between Nadine and Chloe didn't evoke the same emotional response in me as the well-established characters in Uncharted 4. It was to be expected. But there's always a but. What is indeed quite problematic for an Uncharted game is the complete lack of emotional attachment. Apart from one or two well-executed scenes, I never really felt an emotional connection to Nadine or Chloe during the entire game. It was great to see Chloe again, but apart from a few snippets of new information, The Lost Legacy didn't add any significant new insights to her character. We learn more about Nadine, but not enough to leave the one-dimensional, unnecessary Nadine from Uncharted 4 behind. We spent an entire game with her, yet the Lost Legacy fails to transform her into a complex, well-developed character. Even worse, I couldn't shake off the feeling that Naughty Dog tried to make the calculating, cold mercenary which was presented to us in Uncharted 4 into a lovable, misunderstood companion by all means. Nadine acts like a tamed house cat around Chloe at times. If it was the plan to let Lost Legacy's story end on some sort of sisterhood note, go for it. However, Nadine's character simply changed too rapidly in my opinion, to a point where the female Arnold Schwarzenegger from Uncharted 4 appeared like a different character. The reason why the Lost Legacy ultimately can't compete with any of the mainline Uncharted games, despite its phenomenal setting and set pieces, is the lack of emotional attachment to the characters. Even Uncharted Drake's Fortune, for all its flaws, managed to establish 3 lovable characters fairly quickly. Uncharted 1 didn't have the benefit of Uncharted 4 regarding the emotional resonance of an entire franchise, yet I fell in love with Sully, Elena and Nate nonetheless. When the credits of Uncharted 1 started to roll over the screen, I was ready for another adventure. I wanted to revisit these characters. Unfortunately, I don't feel the same way about Nadine even after finishing The Lost Legacy. But as we've seen with previous games in the franchise, one game should be more than enough to establish a complex, likable character. Uncharted 2 did it with Chloe and Uncharted 4 did it with Sam Drake. At first, the idea of squeezing in Nathan Drake's long-lost brother, a character who was never mentioned before and was supposed to stand frame and center in the last Nathan Drake adventure, seemed forced and unnecessary. However, in retrospect, Sam is one of the best characters in the franchise. His appearance in Uncharted 4 is everything but unnecessary. The relationship between him and Nathan is of utmost importance for the entire story. Nadine in The Lost Legacy, on the other hand, is just there. Uncharted is known for fantastic supporting characters, and in my opinion, The Lost Legacy doesn't deliver on this promise. At no point did I feel the same kind of emotional connection I experienced while walking around with Sully, Elena, Chloe or Sam. Laura Bailey is a fantastic actress, her performance isn't the problem, it's the writing. There you have it, my honest thoughts in regard to The Lost Legacy. It's a brilliant game that is missing the most important ingredient for an Uncharted game. I would like to talk in detail about The Lost Legacy and elaborate on the statements I've made so far. If you haven't played The Lost Legacy yet and are afraid of spoilers, you shouldn't watch any further. We are about to enter the spoiler portion of this video. As I've mentioned at the beginning, I've never been so conflicted regarding an Uncharted game. On the one hand, one could argue that the final set piece is the best in the entire series and that the gameplay tweaks might be minor, nonetheless playing Uncharted never felt better than in The Lost Legacy. On the other hand, in terms of character dynamics, the game felt mundane. Depending on how you look at it, the countless Uncharted 2 references are either fantastic or exaggerated. Personally, I enjoyed every second of it. Uncharted 2 is such an important milestone for the franchise, and since then I wanted Uncharted to return to an Asian setting. But I am a fan after all. Climbing billboards in a war-torn city, escaping a psychopathic warlord, and standing on top awe-inspiring statues is a great nostalgia trip. My favorite puzzle section from Uncharted 2 also found its way into The Lost Legacy. It's almost an exact recreation of the temple section. First you have to move the individual arms on a massive statue, followed by a mirror puzzle. We already knew based on the trailer that The Lost Legacy has its own version of Uncharted 2's helicopter fight, but I never would have guessed that they implemented a modernized current-gen version of the infamous train set piece. I'm absolutely confident to call Lost Legacy's train level one of the best, if not the best set piece in the entire Uncharted franchise. Basically, it's a combination of two of the greatest set pieces in Uncharted history, Uncharted 2's train level and Uncharted 4's truck chase. This set piece is a perfect example why Naughty Dog is the king of linear action games. The sheer complexity and length of Lost Legacy's train sequence are mind-boggling. Gunfights, Platforming, melee combat and driving sections are in constant exchange and absolutely seamless. Naughty Dog isn't facing any real competition when it comes to action-packed set pieces. They are only trying to surpass themselves by now. Having said that, some people might argue that the many revivals of already existing Uncharted 2 moments is unoriginal, and in a way they are right. The train level wasn't quite as mind-blowing as Uncharted 2's back in 2009, but that was to be expected. After 5 Uncharted games, it's about time to ask the question whether there are still entirely original set-piece ideas left. We had truck chases, capsizing ships, crashing airplanes, derailing trains,
Here goes nothing.
crumbling ruins in many different variations, burning chateaus, and collapsing buildings. Unless I'm missing something obvious, every future Uncharted set piece will be nothing more than a combination or slight alteration from already existing ones. Still, the set pieces are a great ride, as always. It's just a shame that Lost Legacy didn't do enough with its characters. Chloe is great, and definitely as I remember her. At the same time, we barely learn anything new about her. It probably wasn't the best decision to make her backstory and motivation identical to another famous action-adventure icon. The only new layer that gets added to her character is basically congruent with Lara Croft's backstory in Rise of the Tomb Raider. It turns out, just like Lara, Chloe had a father who alienated himself from his family by being an obsessed archaeologist in search of a legendary artifact. In order to gain some emotional closure, she decides to finish his work. I should have made clear by now that I think Sam Drake is a great addition to the franchise. Sadly, he gets reduced to a comedic relief. Here too, Troy Baker's performance isn't the problem. Overall, the entire story could have played out without him. But I don't want to sound too negative. There are a few well-made character moments, the most memorable of which is the equivalent to the giraffe scene in The Last of Us, only that it's an elephant this time. Bonding moments between characters in combination with animals seems to be some kind of Naughty Dog signature move by now. To boil it down, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy features a few of the best set pieces and environments in the franchise, but is lacking the emotional foundation to hold it all together. This game is proof that Uncharted may be known for stunning graphics, mind-blowing action sequences and cinematic presentation, but the heart and soul of Uncharted always were its fantastic characters. If Naughty Dog doesn't find a way to equip future installments with characters as iconic and memorable as Nathan Drake, Elena Fisher and Victor Sullivan, then I think it would be the wisest decision to lay the franchise to rest once and for all. Besides, Naughty Dog already demonstrated that they can create incredible games outside of Uncharted's colorful pulp adventure world. Just like Uncharted, The Last of Us is defined by its characters. Even so, the genre, pacing and atmosphere of The Last of Us are the polar opposite. I'd rather see Naughty Dog explore new genres instead of getting a great but somewhat repetitious Uncharted spin-off every 2 years. Naughty Dog is the king of linear, character-driven experiences. I'm craving for Naughty Dog to apply their formula to a genre they've never tackled before. What would a Naughty Dog high fantasy or sci-fi game look like? Isn't that 10 times more intriguing than the next Uncharted game? If there's one thing most Uncharted fans can agree upon, it's the fact that characters are the lifeblood of Uncharted, even more so the driving force behind every Naughty Dog game. The Last of Us is Joel and Ellie, which is why the sequel revisits these characters despite the exorbitantly high expectations. Don't get me wrong, I adore Uncharted. I'm incredibly grateful to have been a part of Nathan Drake's adventures. I have a special relationship with Uncharted as a franchise. In a way, Uncharted was my gateway drug into the exciting world of video games and opened my eyes to their storytelling potential. As much as it pains me to say, Uncharted will always have a place in my heart, but it's time to move on.